Alright guys, I'm going to start. What I'm going to be talking about today is bypassing code readout protection on microcontrollers. You'll find out why it's called armadillos later on. You might have heard this phrase before: physical access means game over. It's one of those mantras that gets repeated in information security all of the time. The thing is, with IoT and hardware, the problem is that the device is already in the hands of the attacker. We can just go and buy the device and mess about with it. So this kind of changes the way that we look at things. With servers, with infrastructure, we can't just get hold of it, but with IoT we can. So what we're going to learn today, we're going to learn how to get code off these devices when people don't want us to get the code off it. So they've got locks on them that stop us reading out the firmware. We want to get access to that firmware so we can find vulnerabilities. I'm not going to go into technical detail. I don't want you to go away with this thinking this is a tutorial. You can just go to our blog, Google it, and find out how these attacks work. I want you to get the concept. I want you to understand why it's important. All of the vulnerabilities in this talk, they're not mine. One of them I kind of discovered at the same sort of time as other people, but it's kind of obvious. So all of them that I'm presenting, other people have found them. Some of them are 5, 6, 7 years old. Some of them are only a year old. But they're all vulnerabilities that other people have found. We're going to cover some foundations around what is a microprocessor, why do we want to do this, and why is it challenging. Now there's an important distinction to make. A microcontroller, which is the thing on these devices here, is one package, and it contains the flash, the RAM, and the processor, all within one physical package. They've generally got a small amount of flash, less than 2 megs, so they can't run things like Linux. They can only run a real-time operating system or a very, very lightweight bare metal firmware. A microprocessor, which is something you'll find in a phone, in a computer, that's where the processor, the RAM, and the flash are separate packages. What that means is we can inset the signals between the CPU and the RAM. We can inset the signals between the CPU and the flash. That means protecting that flash memory is much, much harder. Generally, for security applications, people use microcontrollers. For things, HSMs, pin pads, all those kind of devices, people go for microcontrollers because you can lock them. That red boundary goes around the flash and the RAM and makes it harder to access. This is what I'm talking about with an external flash read. This is just an embedded device we looked at last year. The blue clip you can see is clipped onto a flash memory chip. It's connected through to the red box, which is a logic analyzer. We boot the device, all of the signals as it reads the flash memory get read by the logic analyzer, and we can rebuild the contents of the flash. So that makes it very easy to attack them. Why do we want access to the flash memory? Well, we want access to the flash memory so we can change a black box test where we've got no information about how the device operates into a grey box or a white box test. So this is just an example here. TCU, a telematics control unit in a car. It's got all these interfaces, GSM to connect out, CAN bus, Wi-Fi and USB. If we just look at it like a black box, we don't understand how it really works, and it's very difficult for us to find vulnerabilities. We can fuzz it, we can try throwing things at it, we can use our previous experience, but we don't really know how it works. So what we do is we want to change it into this grey box. We want to open up that box and look inside it. So we get access to the flash, which allows us to get the firmware. It allows us to modify the firmware. So can we put a malicious firmware on the device? Find secret keys. We get access to the UART, the serial port, which Mark would have talked about earlier on. So that gives us access to the bootloader and the OS. Got access to the RAM. If we can access the RAM, secret keys, decrypted data, checksums all get calculated in RAM. And JTAG, which we're going to talk about in quite a lot of depth, that allows us to do firmware recovery, get access to the RAM, and debug access to the device. So if you find things like buffer overflows, if we can run debug on the device and actually see the registers, we can build proper exploits. So you've probably come across JTAG in the past, Joint Test Action Group. I think it's quite a misunderstood thing in InfoSec. Getting JTAG access doesn't automatically mean you get access to the firmware. JTAG consists of 5 signals: TDI, TDO, data in, data out, TMS, which changes the state of JTAG, the clock, TCK, and optionally a reset. When you've got access through JTAG, you get access to a thing called the JTAG controller inside the chip. That gives you access then to the flash, CPU, RAM, and also something called boundary scan, which allows you to toggle pins on the outside of the chip. There's also a 2-wire variant of this called serial wire debug, SWD, which is very, very common on ARM processors. So it condenses those down into 2 lines. It's exactly the same protocol, except 2 lines. Now, this is what JTAG looks like. We've got top there, data in, data out, we've got TMS for the state, and then we've got the clock. It's a simple synchronous serial protocol. We don't really have to understand how it works. We just understand it's for moving data in and out of the chip. Now the thing is, people seem to say that, once you've got JTAG access, you've got access to the firmware. And this really isn't the case. There's only a few things that are always provided in JTAG. So the first thing is the electrical signals. We know it's going to have 4, 5 or 2 signals, as I've mentioned before. That's standard. The other thing it's going to have is this state machine. So you can see there we've got this kind of complex flow diagram. All we do is toggle TMS and we move through this state machine. These are the two kind of things that JTAG always provides. It doesn't really do much outside of that. The rest of it's non-standard. But there's some things that we can nearly always say are going to be there. ID code, that lets us read out an ID of the processor. So most JTAG programmers, the first thing they'll do is say, what's the ID of this chip? And it will spit out an ID, and then we'll check that is the chip we're expecting. It's got bypass, where it just shifts the data from the in to the out. That's for test purposes. And boundary scan, that control of the pins around the outside. And that was generally used for testing. They're almost always provided, but they're not standard, so they don't have to be there. The non-standard things are access to CPU registers. That's not actually part of JTAG. You've got access to the RAM and access to the flash. Again, it's not inherent in JTAG that that's there. But the most important thing that's non-standard is JTAG security. There is not a standard way of locking down JTAG. If you say JTAG security is enabled, it doesn't really mean anything. You've got to look at the data sheet for that processor. What I'm going to do is go through a series of different attacks against hardware and how we get the firmware off it. So I hope everyone kind of gets the idea of why devices are locked, and it means we can't get the firmware off. So people have done this, they've locked it and they don't want us to get the firmware off, and we're going to work around that in a number of different ways. This one's called the Heart of Darkness attack. Now this was brought out in a good few years ago. The actual main part of the paper was about HID-I class security, so this is RFID. But to break the security of that, they needed to get keys off the little card reader on the door. And he found a really, really good bypass that allows you to get the firmware off that particular chip. But it turns out that that attack will work against loads of other chips. So I'm going to take you through the concepts of this. Now the memory on the PIC18F that we're talking about here is divided up into blocks. You've got a boot block, which holds the bootloader at the top there, and then you've got the memory divided up into 4 separate blocks. This is really, really common in microprocessors where the memory is divided up like this. And you'll notice it says block code protection controlled by, and then it's got individual settings for each block. So we can enable code protection for individual blocks. We can stop it being written to, we can stop it being read using these bits. So you can do it per block. So the idea is, when you turn code protection on, you can lock those individual blocks. What this does is it stops an attacker coming from the outside and reading that code. That's what it's designed to do. What it's not designed to do, though, is if you take this simple bit of C code here, all this is doing is looping through 0 to 8000, and then it's just reading whatever's pointed to by that address. So we're just reading addresses in memory, really, really simple. That can be in the code, and it can read the code. So code running on the device can read code on the device, regardless of if it's locked or not. There are some microcontrollers that have more granular control, but this is what we're looking at here. Now, the first thing we do whenever we try to bypass code protection is we pick up the datasheet. We don't want to spend weeks looking for some kind of glitch attack or advanced exploit when the datasheet might tell us how to get the firmware off it. So we look here, section 3.1, and what it says there, it says that bulk arrays operations will also clear any code protect settings associated with the memory block erased. Okay, so it doesn't say that if you erase any block, it's going to clear all of the settings or erase all of the blocks. So what that enables to do is erase one block and take the lock off that individual block. So we've got a locked device. All 5 blocks are locked. We can't get access to the firmware at the moment. But what we can do is we can erase one of those blocks. So we go to the boot block and we erase it. The white block just denotes it being blank. There's no lock on it. That means we can read and write from that block without impacting the other ones. So what we do, that little bit of code that looped through all 8,000 addresses, or hex 8,000 addresses, we can put it in there, in that boot block, call it a dumper, and it reads all of the other blocks and dumps the memory out via the serial port. This is a really, really common exploit on these devices. The problem with that is we've overwritten the boot block though. So to get the whole firmware, what we need to do is we need to take 2 devices. So the second one, we erase all of the blocks apart from the boot block, and then we write the dumper in the 3rd block, and that will read the boot block. So we have to do it 2 times. First time to read the main memory, second time to read the boot block. In all honesty, most of these devices, the bootloader is standard, so we don't really care about doing this. So it does destroy the device, stops it working. Not physically destroyed, but the firmware is no longer there. So this is a really, really, really common attack. A lot of different manufacturers recognise this as an attack. Now this is from a Scilabs or Ember EM3598 chip, the datasheet. So what this says is that you've got to enable write protection at the same time as read protection. Because if you don't disable write, someone can write a dumper into the flash memory and then read the flash memory out. So read protection is really, really closely linked to write protection. So that's the first attack, and we find this works against a lot of different processors. Now the next attack is erasing security fuses using UV light. Does anybody remember these chips? Yeah, so cool, wow, okay. So I've shown these before, and like if people are kind of under the age of about 30, they tend not to really know what these are. These used to be in like BBCB micros and loads of different things. This is an EEPROM, an EPROM rather. So it's erasable ROM, but it's not electrically erasable. So EEPROM is what we're used to these days, where you can erase it using electricity. This needed UV light. So the chip there has got a window over the top of it. What you do is you take the chip and you put it inside a little box that had a very, very bright UVC light on the top of it. It would shine on it and erase the chip. So these used to be common. They're virtually unused now because they're expensive and awkward. Now, there's different types of semiconductor cells used for storing memory. Now, this is just vague. Don't take too much from this. All of these memories, EPROM, EEPROM, and flash, all rely on the concept of a floating gate. So that's that middle red thing there on all 3 of them. The floating gate takes a charge, and to read the memory, we see if that charge is there or not. To erase it with the EPROM, what we do is we shine UV light on it, and the charge comes off there. EEPROM allows us to program the individual bits. It's a bit more complex. And flash, you have to erase entire pages. It's quite complex. But you'll notice there's something in common with those 3. They all look really similar, despite the fact that one's the 2 on the left-hand side there, right-hand side, are electrically erasable. So the thing is, we can shine UV light at those as well to erase them. So this allows us to attack those, so we don't have to have access electrically to erase them. What we can do with pretty much any microprocessor is we can decap it. So that means taking the packaging off the top of it. In this case, it's done in a non-destructive manner. So you can see those very, very thin wires jumping between the die, which is the piece in the middle there, and the wires going to the individual pins. We can't destroy them. It makes it quite a slow attack. It's more awkward to preserve the chip like that than it is just to get the die bare. So we need to maintain electrical operation, but we get access to the die. Then what we can do is we shine the UV light on it, and it will erase it. So the security bits, memory that's programmed on the device that says, do not allow the code to be read out. If we can erase those bits using UV light, we can access the firmware. But they clocked onto this. So what they did was they put metal shields above those chips. So this is off Bunny's blog. These things here are literally metal shields over those flash bits that mean that if you shine UV light on the top of the chip, you can't erase them. It kind of works, but they weren't really thinking too well. So this is just a diagram. We try and shine UV light on the top of it. That doesn't work. If we take the chip though and tip it and shine light in at the side, it still erases it. Now, more advanced chips, some of the Maxim stuff has a metal shield over the top of it that has a tamper grid in it, or multiple layers of metal. So this doesn't work on all chips, but it does work on a lot of PIC chips. It works on STM32Fs, a few of those. The problem with it is it's quite a complex attack. You've got to decap the chip. You've then got to work out where the security fuses are, because if you shine the UV light at the program memory, the code, the firmware, it'll also be wiped. The way Bunny did it in this case was he put tape over the top of it. The way other people have done it is make very finely etched masks for the top of them. It's a complex attack and it destroys the chip. You're not going to do this to a device in under 10 minutes in someone's house to get their Wi-Fi keys off of their router. Now this is where I've got demos, and we've really got a lot of potential for this to go completely wrong. So that's all goes good. You're all familiar with ARM processors. So they are in pretty much every phone now. There's probably some in the projectors, there's probably some in the heating system. They're absolutely everywhere. Now, there's a lower grade of processors called the Cortex series. Generally, they're not big enough to run Linux unless they're one of the bigger ones. The Cortex-M0 definitely can't. It's a very small chip. It's the kind of thing that you get in a light switch. It's the kind of thing you get in a thermostat. It doesn't really have much space. But the thing that we do find it in a lot is Bluetooth chipsets. So this is a NRF. Look at this. This is brilliant. Thank you, Tim. PTP is a great company to work for, by the way. This is a NRF Bluetooth chip. So it's a microprocessor again. These are found in so many different things. You know, Tile, the little locator beacons, most of those will have an NRF 51822 in it. They're really, really common, but getting access to the firmware quite often helps us find vulnerabilities in these. Now, this attack was developed by Include Security in 2015. I think a lot of us knew about it, but we hadn't eloquently written it up. So Include definitely get the credit with this one. Their write-up's brilliant, by the way. This is a little diagram showing you the inside of the chip. So we've got the JTAG controller at the top there. We've got the flash, the CPU, and the RAM. This is an unlocked device. We can access the flash, the registers, and the RAM. It's all good. You turn the lock on, and it stops you accessing the flash and the RAM. So we can't directly read the firmware out. We don't get direct access to the keys. But you'll notice we do still have access to the CPU, the registers in the CPU. And that CPU still has access to the flash and the RAM. Now, we can't execute arbitrary code. We can't load anything to RAM to make it run code, but we can perform a trick. This is where the demo happens. I'll talk you through it in nice big pictures, and then we'll try and actually carry the attack out against the device. So what we're going to do is use something called OpenOCD. It's interfacing to the chip using SWD, as we mentioned, so a variant of JTAG. The first thing we do is we reset the device. So we've reset the device. That's just like killing the power. At that point, you'll notice that we've got the program counter there, which is the next instruction to be executed is set to 12B98. So that's called the reset vector. That's where the device goes to initially. You've got the MSP, which is the main stack pointer on ARM, and you can see that's set to 2001C48. So we can see these values. It doesn't matter if the chip's locked or unlocked. We've got access to the registers and the CPU. There's something that you can always take as a given with all ARM Cortex-M0 processors, is this memory layout. At address 0 is always the initial stack pointer value. So at address 0, we're always going to have that 2001C48. So we're seeing flash memory in a register. It will always load that. The reset vector is always stored at 0x4, which is 12B98, or expecting it to be 12B98. Again, we're reading that from a register. PC is a register, not the flash. So we're taking flash memory and we're reading it through a register. It goes up and on like that, but the rest of them aren't as predictable. So what we can do with OpenOCD is we can type MDW 0x4. That means memory display word 4. And you can see there, we've got the reset vector, almost, 12B99. So we were expecting 12B98, but it's gone to 12B99. The reason that last bit is 1 increased is for a processor that operates in thumb mode, 16-bit rather than 32-bit instructions. The LSB represents thumb mode, so you'll always get this offset on Cortex-M0s. So we reboot the device, and we can look at all of the registers. So we type reg in OpenOCD, and it will dump all the registers. So we've got R0 through to R12. They'll all be all Fs. That's the reset state of this particular processor. You can see that the PC there, 12B98, and you can see the MSP there, 2001C48. So we can see they're being read from flash memory. We know at this point that even though the device is locked, we can still access the flash indirectly via the registers. What we can also do through OpenOCD is we can step forwards. We can move the program counter and execute one instruction at a time. The command for that is step. It's pretty obvious. So you can see at the top there, PC's 12B98. We step forwards and it becomes 12B98. So it moves forward 4 every time. That's the address size on this. You can see before reg R3 was showing reg R3 reset state of all Fs, and then we step forwards and it's been modified to 1014. We know that that instruction at 12B98 has modified R3. So we don't have to know what the code is, but we know it's modified that. Now, if we look to an unlocked device, we've moved through to something called GDB, the new debugger. It's very similar to OpenOCD in what we're doing here, but what it does is it also disassembles the code. So if I tell it to go to 12B98 and tell it to display instructions instead of memory, it will disassemble that. So you can see 12B98 there, LDR, which is a load register. It says load into R3, program counter plus 84, whatever's in that address. So you can see at the end there, it's taken the program counter 12B98, added 84 on to get this address, and then it's loaded it into R3. We can check that address by doing memory display again. So you get that 1014 there at the end. So you can see 1014 there, 1014 there. So we've been able to infer that that was a load into R3, even though we couldn't see this instruction. We can see the instruction because we've unlocked it here. But these devices have got code protection, and that code protection allows us to stop people reading the flash, as we said. It's just another flash address. So you set 2 bytes or 4 bytes of that to 0, and it will lock it, and we won't be able to access it. So in that condition, with this particular chip, we lock it, we reset it, and we ask memory display 0 by 4, and you'll see instead of getting the 12B98, the reset vector, we get all zeros. That means that it's locked. This behaviour isn't given. Some PIC chips return all Fs, some devices return random data. In this case, it's all zeros. But if we go back and we think about it, and we look to the next instruction at 12B9A, the LDR R3, 0, what that's saying is whatever is in R3, go to that address and load it into R3. Can you see where the problem here is? The thing is, we've got control of R3. We can set R3, and we're loading into R3. So what we do is we set R3 to 0 by 4, step over that instruction, and R3 will now contain the flash memory from 0 by 4, even though we've not had access to the flash memory. So I'll show you that here. We set the program counter to 12B9A, the instruction. We set R3 to be 4. We step forwards, and then we look at R3 again, and look, we've got the value of memory from 0 by 4, 12B99 in this case. Change it so the code protection is enabled there. So there's that FF00FF. That says code protection enabled. We try and display it directly, all zeros. Program counter, set R3 to 04, step forwards, we've read flash memory. This allows us to read the flash memory from the device. We can script that. So we just go through, start at 0, go all the way to the top, and we've dumped the memory from the device. So what I'll do is I will try to show you how that works. So we've got Ubuntu here. It's connected through to one of the devices. I'll just show you how simple it is. Hold on. So yeah, this is the NRF board here. Very, very small. Just one chip on it. There's nothing really significant. A couple of crystals because it does RF stuff. We've got 4 wires connected to the back, and then we go through to this little device here, which is an ST-Link. It's an SWD debugger. They cost £7 off eBay if you want a genuine one. If you want to go ungenuine, they go down to about £2. They're not expensive. So we hop back to Ubuntu. And I find my mouse pointer. We're already connected with OpenOCD. So I can do MDW0, and you get the 2001 C48. MDW4, and I get the 12B99, completely as expected. What we can then do, if I just go and find the right instruction, flash fill word. This is writing that value to enable code protection. So I'm going to run that. I'll just take a second. We've now enabled code protection. Now, something interesting here is you have to reset the device for code protection to be enabled. So if we still do MDW, you'll notice it works fine. We need to make sure we've reset it. And then if we do MDW4, you'll see we get the all zeros. It's been enabled. We show the registers. Like so. And you can see they're all Fs apart from program counter and the stack pointer. You can now set R3 to be 0 by 4. Check R3 there. You can see it's been set correctly. We'll step forwards. You can see how the program counter is incremented. We can see that's been set to that hard-coded value from memory. This instruction is not any use to us. We need to set R3 again to 4. Then we'll step again, move one instruction further forwards, and then we'll look at register R3 again. And now you can see we've got that 12B99. So this allows us to dump the firmware. It's pretty fast actually. We come through to here, I've scripted it all up. It should work. So this is just going through the memory, reading it a single word at a time. You can see it's not exactly the fastest in the world. It's quite slow, it has to do a few instructions. It's doing it via telnet. But this allows us to dump the firmware off the device. This isn't inherent to the ARM Cortex-M0 series. I mean, it's quite common, but it's not a given. Right. That's my little cheat sheet in case I forget the commands. So from that, we end up with a binary file. So if we do hexdump bsides.bin, you'll see right at the top there, the 0 address there, you've got 20. It's the endiness is flipped around, so again you can see the 2B99 and 01 there. So it's all flipped around, but we've got access to the flash memory, so that allows us to recover it. Now let's jump back to the slides. So we scripted that up, but you're saying, how do we actually find an instruction like this if we can't read the firmware off the device? So we're going to have to do a trick. I mentioned these things run thumb. The thing about thumb is it's 16-bit instructions, not 32-bit. So if you want to load a direct value in, a 32-bit word, into a register, you can't provide it in the instruction. It's just not long enough. You can't put a 32-bit value into a 16-bit instruction. So you never get direct values that are 32 bits. So you see this pattern here where you do R0 and then it does program counter plus offset. So it will jump to the end of the function and read the memory from there to load it back in. So it's this indirect loading of values. It's very, very common. So the pattern, when someone wants to load a particular address in memory, the address will be here, it will load that into R0, then it will load the address of R0 into R0. The thing is that the default NRF bootloader that comes with these devices, this is the assembly. You can see there, it varies from a particular device, but you can see it moves R0 into R5. It's practically a given within 10 instructions at the beginning, you will find one of these vulnerable instructions. So we already know 2 of the values. We reset it, we can see in the registers, we get 0 by 0 and 0 by 4 as the addresses, so we know what they are. So all we do is we set all of the registers to 0. We then step forwards and see how that impacts the registers. So we set it to 12B9A, and you can see, well, 12B9C, you can see R3 is the only one that's impacted. And it's the right value, it's read 0 into R3. So we think, okay, this is probably an instruction that works for us. We then set the registers all to 4, try it again, and then we see the 12B99. So it's just a process of trial and error to find that. It works really, really well. A lot of ARM Cortex-M0s are impacted by this. So this next attack is cold boot stepping. Again, this one has been known about for a long time. It was only really given the name cold boot stepping last year by a couple of researchers, though. Do you all know what a CRC check is? Or a CRC checksum, cyclic redundancy check. They're really common in embedded systems. So alongside the firmware image, you'll get a checksum. To calculate that checksum and make sure that it's right, you've got to loop through the flash image and perform a calculation on every single byte of that flash. The way that's done, as you can see here, is you copy data from flash into RAM to calculate those instructions. So again, what we've got there is the device will always copy flash into RAM when it boots. This isn't a given, it depends on the bootloader. So different bootloaders don't do this. It's not a given, but it's common. Now looking at another particular chip, this is the STM32F0 series. When you apply readout level protection 1, what this does is it stops you accessing flash and it stops you accessing the CPU. Both of them are dead to us, but it still lets us read the RAM of the device. So if we've got access to the RAM and it's performing a checksum, all we have to do is we reset the system, so we've got the device in a known state. We let it run for a period of time, dump the RAM, store that RAM, let it run for more the next time around. Keep on stepping through. So this is why it's called cold boot stepping. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Obviously, you need to bring those times down, so you're only letting one cycle run at a time. This can be really challenging. So these devices run at 8 meg, and it's already becoming quite difficult to get the resolution to read the RAM there. So what we need to do, first off, is we need to get this timing accurate. If we're going to be resetting the device and reading the RAM, we could use a laptop, SWD over USB, doing the resets and everything like that. But the timing is not accurate enough. USB is horrifically latent and unpredictable. So what we need to do is we need to attack it with another microprocessor. So that takes out the unpredictability of USB. So we've got really tight control of that. But even then, it's still difficult. If a device is running at 48 megahertz, you've got to sample probably 24 meg sample rate. This is quite high. So how do we work around that? Well, we provide the clock to the device. Now, this won't work with everything. A lot of devices, when they boot, will only allow clock frequencies. They work off an internal oscillator, or they'll only allow frequencies over a given range. But on a lot of processors, including these little boards here, it's got a pin that allows you to input a clock. You can literally make it a toggle switch if you want it. So you can run instructions when you want. So you can slow it right down, and then we can dump the RAM every time we've done a clock cycle, and then we can see the contents. So it's a really easy way if CRC is enabled. The other thing is, of course, if there's secret keys stored in the RAM or anything like that, you can access it. Now this is the demo that's really probably going to go completely wrong. Again, this attack isn't me. So this one, the paper it's from is called Shedding Too Much Light on a Microcontroller's Firmware Protection. Now, you can guess which attack this is describing, can't you? The one with UVC light. So this attack, one of the attacks in the paper is the UVC fuse reset against the STM32F0. But the actual interesting stuff in this paper isn't that, in my opinion. We've known about this problem for years with UVC. This does cold boot stepping as the first attack, UVC, and then this race condition, which I think is the best one. Again, you'll see this diagram. This is a slightly different situation. So we lock JTAG, and it allows access to the CPU, but the CPU doesn't allow access to the flash and RAM in this case. So it's not like the time with the NRF 51822. We can't access the flash and RAM. That exploit's not there. Now, you remember at the start I said that JTAG controller is not standard. What that does and how it behaves isn't part of the specification. We don't know how that works, and it can have bugs in it, and people don't realise that. Now, this is just a brilliant attack. On the left-hand side here, we're looking at SWD, how the device is being debugged. On the right-hand side, we're looking at the device actually booting and reading memory itself. Now, the key thing here is the way that the device locks the flash is the first time anything tries reading the flash memory, it prevents access via JTAG after that point. So if the device reads the flash using its own code, it will lock access to the flash over JTAG. If you try and read it over flash, it will lock access. So we've got this situation. We start up SWD. The first thing it does, and you've got to do this, is it reads the ID code. Then it starts faffing about. OpenOCD, the spec, does all these different things, so it messes around. It does a bit more messing about, at which point the device is booted and it starts reading the flash, or it's started up and starts reading the code, so it can boot. That triggers the lock of the flash. So from this point onwards, we can't read the flash. So if at that point we try and read the flash, we don't get access to it. Do you see where this is going? The thing is, those messing around bits, they might be in the datasheet, they might be implemented by the software, but we don't have to do them. So we just move the flash read up by shortening that series, and we've read it. So it will get locked. That read will lock it, but we've read one single word of memory. So we reset the system, we initialize debug, we set the address we're reading, we read the flash, and as long as we're quicker than the device reading the flash, we'll win and we'll get 1 byte of data back from it. Keep on looping around that, and this sounds ridiculous. It sounds like it's not going to work, but guess what? It does. So to talk you through the setup, it's exactly the same as before. The attacking system needs to have tight control of time for it to work. This is directly taken from the guys who developed it. They've got 2 boards. You've got the board under attack here, and you've got the firmware extractor board here. So what it's doing is you've got these 2 pins here are doing SWD interface, but we've also got control of the power. So we're providing 3.3 volts to it there, and we're also providing the reset signal. So this board can power up and reset this board. It can also send SWD. It's all controlled via a laptop, so there's a serial port there going through. There's a little client that allows us to dump the firmware. The brilliant thing about this attack is these boards cost £7, so you can go and order them from Farnell or whoever, £7, and the firmware that you can get is just available to download. It's even pre-compiled, so you can load it onto it and see it working. It's a bit finicky at times, but it does work. And I'm going to demo it. And this is where it's really got potential to go wrong. So this is my setup. You can see it's perhaps not quite as neat as the setup they've got. So here we've got the attacking board. So this is the one there, connected via USB through to my laptop, and we've got the board under attack here. I'll just turn that around a bit. It's just replicating what they've done. Yeah, it's Hunter 2, by the way. What's going on there? Let me just shut this. The presenter camera seems to sometimes take a little bit too much. There we go. So it's just a client. They've done this all for us. It's an absolutely brilliant attack for learning. Oh, why am I doing piping less to less? That's broken, isn't it? Little piping script that connects through to it. We tell it its address to go to. Let's see if this works. The firmware is really good as well, because what it does is it's got secret strings in it. It's got a string in RAM and a string in flash, so we can see when the attack works. So there you go. You can see this is the rate. It's reading out real time. This is some secret data which is stored in the flash memory together with the firmware. If you can read this, your attack works correctly. So that's us read firmware off a code protected device by this race condition on SWD. You can see down the bottom here it says attempt 6A. So it's tried 6A times to read that. You can see success 34, failure 36. It really is a race condition. We're right on the boundary of that being successful. There's a lot more work to do here. If we speed up the clock, can we get more data out of it? One of the absolutely brilliant things as an attacker is I don't have to make things work particularly well. If this thing is only rated to go up to 8 megahertz and there's a race condition that's just exploitable, if I run it up to 12 meg and it still lets me exploit the race condition but crashes every 5th time, I don't care. I'm an attacker. I don't want it to be reliable. I need to get access to that code. Wow, 2 demos that work. This is unprecedented. So yeah, that's that attack. The last one I'm going to talk about, and I'm not going to go into huge depth, has anyone heard of glitching as an attack against processors? Now this is the one that's kind of unpredictable and takes a long time to develop. We talked about with these SDMs, they've got different code readout levels. So some of them allow you to still read certain things or still program the flash. So an SDM's got 2 levels. Level 1, you can still program the flash. Level 2, that's it, game over, no access to the device anymore. It's the same as some of the NXP processors, which is what this is from. You've got 3 levels, CRP level 1, 2 and 3. And you have to program these values into flash. They're quite specific values. But what you'll notice is that there's every other option apart from those 4 out of the 32-bit word mean there's no code readout protection on the device. So if we can cause an error that changes any bit in that word, then we've managed to bypass code readout protection. Interestingly, this isn't exploitable on everything. The NRF board here and the EM3598 chip here, for it to be disabled, it has to be A55A. If it's any other value, then code readout protection is enabled. So glitches to memory reads generally won't allow you to get access. So that's one of the ways that glitching allows us to cause problems. Just to quickly explain glitching, sometimes it really is this simple. A normal clock is just a very regular pulse. So we'll load instructions, we'll execute the previous instructions loaded and step through like that. If we just send a clock pulse that doesn't match up with what it's expecting a bit too quickly, it can cause instructions to be skipped entirely. And why is that important? Well, how would you check to see if a value is equal to A55A? You'd compare the value you've read from flash to the hard-coded value of A55A. I've missed the slide. Oh well. Essentially, it's quite common for this it literally to be compare to value. If we can cause it to skip over that instruction at exactly the right time, the bootloader will skip over the code protection and we've got access to the device. Sometimes these attacks can be trivial. It can literally be you jabbing the power pin whilst it's booting and with a resistor to drop the voltage a bit, and it will cause a glitch. Other times you need to spend a lot of time on it. They're not very reliable, which is why I'm not trying to demo them today. So why does it need to be secret? And this is kind of the concept stuff that I think is important to go like a higher level. Then these attacks are great. You can go away and learn them. They're all blogged. It's nice and easy to replicate. I don't know if you've heard of this saying, Kirchhoff's principle. A crypto system should be secure, even if everything about the system except the key is public knowledge. It's a really common principle. So the idea is that your algorithm, if that was in the public, it still should be secure. But you can abstract that a bit further. And if we say if your firmware is in the public, apart from the key material, it still should be secure. Now, I get a bee in my bonnet about this. I get a bee in my bonnet about a lot of things, actually. Security through obscurity is the reliance on the secrecy of the design or implementation as the main method of providing security of a system. I think that's a good definition, because Daniel Meisler said security by obscurity is bad, but security with obscurity isn't. So if you've got a firmware that's completely secure and you stop someone being able to read it from your device, you're in a better position. If people can't see your firmware, they can't find the vulnerabilities. Now, I realise this is not a position that everybody agrees with. An interesting saying here, you don't have to run faster than the bear to get away. You just have to run faster than the guy next to you. I think this is so key with IoT. The majority of blog posts and disclosures about IoT are low-hanging fruit. There's someone connecting to the serial port on a device. There's someone dumping the firmware. There's someone just using Burp Suite to fuzz the web interface. It's not difficult to find stuff. All you have to do is make it that little bit harder and people will move on. But then there's no advantage to outswimming your fellow surfers if the shark specifically wants to eat you. So there's certain markets where people are going to want to target your device. And can you predict that? Probably not. Yeah, this one. Many eyes make all bugs shallow. I don't know, does anybody agree with this? Do we have any open source zealots in the audience? Are you going to beat me if I say bad things about Linus? Shellshock proves open source's many eyes can't see straight. In the last few years, we've had bug after bug that's existed for 5+ years in code. OpenSSL, Heartbleed have been there for a long time. Spectre and Meltdown have been there for a long time. And when you see those bugs, you think, how did I not notice that? How, especially with Heartbleed, how did someone not see that bug? So the thing is, even if your firmware is in the open, even if you open source it, are people going to find problems? So why would you want to protect firmware, even if you weren't subscribing to this many eyes make all bugs shallow and all this kind of stuff? Well, intellectual property is one of the reasons. Driver assistance and self-driving cars. You can't place the decision logic on a server for that. It's got to be in the car to allow real-time decisions to be made. So if you look at ADAS on most cars, they've got quite advanced algorithms to detect things happening. Those people want to protect the intellectual property contained within. So one reason. Symmetric device-wide keys. Now, in an ideal world, we wouldn't have a key on a device that's the same for every single device. It's clearly a bad idea. But this is from the bootloader for the EM3598 here. The default bootloader they provide code for has got a symmetric AES key on all devices. So if you produce a device and you want to secure your firmware, the secrecy of the key on this device is key. If someone gets it, they can then produce malicious firmware for your device. That's another reason code readout protection is important. We've got per device secrets. Now, the reason I mention this, on the left-hand side here, we've got a VoIP phone. Now, this was a specific job for a customer who works in national infrastructure. And they said to us, we want you to get the 8021X certificates for our network. Now, it was a pretty open scope. We could do what we wanted. So we could steal someone's laptop. We know that they've got full disk encryption. We know the security of them. The build's quite good, so that probably wasn't going to work. The other thing with stealing a laptop is generally someone's going to get annoyed and call the police. It will be a theft that someone cares about. How many of you got VoIP phones on your desk? How many of you, if you came in one morning to find it missing, would be happy? You can steal a VoIP phone and no one will care. Now, in this particular example, that Polycom phone there, external flash, it wasn't a microcontroller, but we recovered the 8021X certificate of it, and yes, in this particular situation, it was the same one that used on the rest of their network, and that was us onto their network. The other one, this Cisco Aeronet 600, it's a home worker router. So the idea is you plug it into your home router, it sets up a wireless access point, It VPNs into your work and creates an enterprise-grade wireless network in your house. But it's got VPN keys in it. If I can go into your house and I can get keys off that device in under 5 minutes without leaving any evidence, you have a problem. So you've got to understand there's different layers of protection here. So this is where this comes. Armadillos. Does anybody remember this advert? Yes. So, crunchy on the outside, soft on the inside. That's what a lot of these devices are like. Vendors have hardened the code readout protection so we can't get access to the firmware. But once we're in, it's absolute ruin. There's vulnerabilities everywhere. Now, when I was yesterday, I was looking for this armadillo picture, and this is completely pointless. But when I typed it into Google, can you eat an armadillo? Are armadillos bulletproof? And can you get leprosy by touching an armadillo? And then someone thought, oh, should I eat a raccoon straight after they did that? Anyway, that's just as an aside. So, yeah, we've got this big summary table now. So what I've done is I've given the different attacks here. Heart of Darkness, where we overwrite an individual block of memory. UVC fuse reset. The ARM Cortex-M0, cold boot stepping, race condition, and glitching. Now, the thing is you'll notice the devices it impacts. First off, these attacks impact many devices. It's really hard to work out which devices they impact. The SWD race condition is so specific. This is STM32F0. It doesn't work on this one. That one, however, it does work on. So it's a very, very specific family. It might even be fixed on later generations. So you can't work out which devices are impacted. In terms of the class of bug, most of these are actually caused by the silicon vendor. They're out of your control. They're design oversights. So say, for example, Heart of Darkness. The PIC datasheet doesn't mention you might be able to read the code out via this means. The NRF one, they haven't published an errata to say that you can do this. Cold boot stepping as well. The only one there that I'd really say is in your control is UVC fuse reset. If you buy a device that doesn't protect against that, that's your fault. You can buy devices that protect against it, and it will be in the datasheet. In terms of the attack, you'll notice a lot of these do not damage the device. Some of these I can get done in seconds, literally seconds against the device. So we've gone into the region of evil maids. You know, someone walking into your hotel room and attacking a device to get keys off of it. If we look at the ESP8266, which I guess a lot of you have heard of, it's a little Wi-Fi chipset. It's got a Tenselica processor in it. It's got no protection on the flash memory whatsoever. So it's external flash. We can read it. It's got a serial bootloader that allows us to read the flash. And we've done this. We can do it in under a minute. Unplug the module from the back of your consumer device, read your Wi-Fi key, plug it back in, and we've got your Wi-Fi key. Is that a problem? I don't know. That's not for me to decide. The mitigation, you'll notice that some of these need you to change to a different device. Some of them can't be changed by settings or configuration. Some of them can. This is probably the most heartwarming aspect of this. And are you impacted? Well, the problem is most of these need you to take your device and test it. The only one there that you can really read a datasheet and say, is this going to impact me, is Heart of Darkness. So that's interesting. Again, it's outside of your control. Now, this is an excerpt from a microchip datasheet. In fact, for the one that Heart of Darkness impacted. I just want to go through just some of the words used here, just to kind of think about the attitude that silicon vendors have got towards this. Microchip believes that its family of products is one of the most secure families of its kind on the market today, when used in the intended manner and under normal conditions. Yeah, now, I don't know about you, but it's kind of our job to not do things in the intended manner. That's what hacking is. It's finding those edge cases. Then they say there are dishonest and possibly illegal methods used to breach the code protection feature. God, this really annoys me when people frame things as illegal. Like, again, if I want to steal your intellectual property, I'm going to steal your intellectual property. This isn't going to stop me. These methods require using the microchip products in a manner outside the operating specifications. No shit. But then they kind of bring it back a bit. It says neither Microchip nor any other semiconductor manufacturer can guarantee the security of their code. This is important. You can't guarantee the security of the code on these devices. It's a layer of security, but it cannot be the only thing you do. So what can you do? If you're a collaborative security consultant, and what I mean by that is someone like me who works with vendors to make their products better, you need to teach your customers that no matter how secure they think the device is, and an attacker with enough time, money, and skill can probably get the firmware off that device. But remember, it's still a useful layer of obfuscation. If their firmware's got no problems and you can't read it, then people are going to struggle to work out how it works. Oh, animation's gone to pop. But it also means to push towards white box testing. Now, if you test IoT, it's still very, very difficult to get a manufacturer to give you the source code. They'll want you to get the firmware off the device, they'll want you to disassemble it, decompile it, and reverse engineer it. Now, if I can get the firmware off an ARM chip, I can sit there and spend weeks and weeks looking for vulnerabilities in IDA. But it would be much easier if they just gave me the firmware. So they need to accept that, teach them that. If you're an offensive security researcher, and by that I mean you're, rather than just say rude words, you're buying products and you're finding vulnerabilities. Learn these techniques and carry them out against devices. They're very generic and we see them work time and time again. Be prepared for failure. You will buy devices and you'll find no bypass. And then a week later someone will release a paper and you'll go, oh, that's really obvious, and you'll feel really stupid. And buy development boards instead of real devices. The reason I have this EM3598 board here is those chips are used in pretty much every smart meter in the UK. Now I could get that smart meter. It doesn't have a JTAG head on it, so then I'd have to solder and tack wires onto it. If I brick it, I can't work out how to recover it. If I brick this, I just plug a new module into it. It's cheap and easy. So in terms of makers, people who actually make things, and I don't know if there's any or many of you here, so you've got to realise that people can recover the firmware, but you don't know how hard or easy that will be, really. So just accept it will happen. But remember, there's other ways to get the firmware. We recently had an interesting situation where someone really, really wouldn't give us the firmware for a white box test because they said there's no way you'll get it off this chip. We couldn't get it off the chip. It would have taken us months maybe to see if we could. But that doesn't stop one of their developers uploading it all to GitHub by mistake. It doesn't stop someone hacking into them and dumping the firmware. There are other ways the firmware can be got. So relying on firmware secrecy is not a good way of doing things. So just assume your firmware is public. And by that I mean don't put comments saying to add security in your firmware. Obey Kirchhoff's principle as well. Assume that the key is the only secret thing about your system. Semiconductor vendors, just accept that silicon does have bugs. The race condition there is a bug in the JTAG controller. Accept you'll make mistakes. So I don't think Microchip considered the Heart of Darkness attack. It was a new attack when it was released. No one had thought of that. So you will make mistakes. Be honest. It's nice that Microchip say that we can't guarantee security. On the flip side, they do overstate the security it provides. And publish errata when issues are fixed. None of the exploits here are detailed in data sheets or application notes for any of these vendors. So you can't just go and download a datasheet and say, yes, there's a way of circumventing this. And just to finish, I really like this saying, if we guard our toothbrushes and diamonds with equal zeal, we will lose fewer toothbrushes and more diamonds. So this was a guy, it predates information security by a long stretch. But what I'm saying by that is, if you've got a tile Bluetooth beacon, does it really matter if that gets hacked? Do you want to spend an extra $2 per chip making that secure? Whereas if you've got a home worker router, do you want to protect those VPN keys to a better extent? Or do you want to take other mitigating steps to prevent that from happening? So we've got to make sure that we apply appropriate levels of protection to these devices. And that's the end. I've got 3 of these STM32 things, and they conveniently solder onto the badge here, and you can do cool things with them that are unspecified as of yet. But yeah, if anyone's got any questions, I'll give them away. If no one asks any questions, I don't know how I'm going to see who gets them. I might just throw them. So has anyone got any questions? Okay. Sorry. Oh, God. Always finding a way out. Okay, sorry, yes.
Just a question about how consumers don't know if their products are affected by these code protection vulnerabilities.
Yeah.
What do you think is the solution to that? Would the solution be open source,
yeah.
open source code, or would it be more communication with vendors and breakers, or
yeah, just to repeat that for the video. So what you're asking is how to make consumers aware that these vulnerabilities are in devices.
Yeah.
I think you can kind of abstract that away from code readout protection. Just think about vulnerabilities full stop.
Sure.
I don't have any of it with me, but I bought a Samsung camera 4 years ago. and it had a series of vulnerabilities that allowed it to be rooted. Local attack, but it's still not great. I broke it. I went and bought another one 3 years on. The vulnerabilities were all still there. We blogged about them, we disclosed them, but there was no way for a consumer to know. There was Amazon reviews, they weren't great, but none of them said this is a horrifically insecure product. I don't know what the solution is. It's an awkward one. Vendors don't care at the moment. The problem with open sourcing things is that at the moment there's just it's the commercial norm not to leak how you do things. I find it really odd. I mean, we looked at a product last year that all it did was connect to a web server, download a bit of JSON, and then turn a light on based on that JSON. And the person looking at that was concerned about intellectual property theft. I'm like, okay, that's not your threat here, is it really? I don't know the solution. Sorry. So I think probably the most important thing is to make sure that you lock, if you're talking specifically about code readout, is to protect against code readout, is if you lock the device down to the maximum extent. Now, I mentioned the STM32F and the way it's got these different code readout levels. So what we've found is that developers won't enable or disable JTAG entirely. They want to leave some semblance of access there. You speak to them and they say it's for if they get returns, working out why they're broken. But then you visit them a year later and they've got a big cardboard box full of broken devices and no one's connected to JTAG to see what went wrong with them. You need to think, are we actually going to use that JTAG functionality once it leaves the factory? The problem is that it's very difficult for you to work out, are these chips vulnerable or not? It's very difficult for us to work out if they're vulnerable or not. I think if you're making things, the key takeaway is you've got to make sure your device is secure, even if code readout protection is broken. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I mean the thing is that some vendors don't actually have a way of disabling JTAG entirely. They do have levels of protection, but you can never stop register access on some of them. Whereas other ones just make it trivial. It's a register setting, that's it, JTAG will never work again. The other thing I've seen is that manufacturers are scared of locking themselves out of devices. And, I can't discuss that. I've 2 occasions now I've seen people lock themselves out of remote devices. Something's gone wrong that's meant that they cannot update the firmware on devices. In one of those situations, the reason that they put those protections in place was because of specific advice I'd given them to put that protection in place. I didn't say put that protection in place and then lose the private key, but that's what happened. So that was before I worked for PTP. Anyway, yeah, I hope that helps. Yeah. So in terms, yeah. So if you just for the camera again, you're asking how does this impact SCADA, ICS, and OT? First thing I have to say is generally I find that SCADA is significantly behind in terms of security anyway. Not in this slide deck, but we just say hacking Windows, you need to know ROT, buffer overflows, all these things. Hacking ICS, all you need to do is read the manual. But that's typically how it rolls. The thing is that I don't actually like the term IoT, just that we have to say it because otherwise people don't listen to you. I think they're the same thing. A device that's internet connected is maybe not the best term. It's an IP connected device. It can be on a private network and they suffer from the same issues. But you've got bigger challenges with SCADA. If you call up Siemens and ask them for the firmware on a device, they're not going to give it to you. They won't even let you download it unless you've got a commercial arrangement with them. I think ICS has got a lot further to come than IoT, to be honest. Does that kind of answer it? Yeah. Yeah, I think, I mean, on the whole, if you rip open a PLC, it would be using a processor that's based on technology from probably 20 years ago. They generally tend to be a bit more dated. It's been verified as working, so quite often they've got a layer of obscurity, because no one's looked at those processors, because the only thing they're in are switches that cost 10 times as much as a domestic Ethernet switch. It's just a layer of obscurity that may or may not help. I'm overrunning, so I think I need to move so the next talk can start. Thank you, guys.